The riot ignites. The ground shook with the weight of fury above. Even deep in the basement, Detective Laura Jensen could hear it. Hundreds of men roaring in unison, boots pounding against steel, fists crashing into flesh. The riot was no longer a disturbance. It was an uprising. As Jensen and Ramirez crept back through the narrow tunnel leading out of the hidden vault, the echo of gunfire filtered down from the prison yard. The staccato bursts were unmistakable, automatic rifles. The weapons from the crates were already in play. When they emerged into the freezer, smoke had seeped even into the cold air. A faint orange glow licked the walls through the cracks of the door. Fire was spreading. "Detective," Ramirez said, voice ragged. "If we don't get control, this whole place is going to burn down with us in it." "Not just burn," Jensen muttered, pulling him forward. "It'll bleed into the streets. If the inmates push past the gates with those weapons, Blackridge won't be the only battlefield." They stepped into the corridor and chaos swallowed them whole. The prison had become unrecognizable. The orderly lines of cells and corridors were replaced with barricades of overturned tables, burning mattresses, and rivers of blood. Inmates stormed in packs, their faces smeared with sweat and soot, screaming for vengeance. Some carried knives fashioned from sharpened rebar, others rifles looted from the hidden stash. Guards fought desperately to hold ground, but they were fractured. Some stood firm, firing shotguns into the smoke, others abandoned posts entirely. And some, Jensen saw it clearly, fought alongside the inmates, turning their guns on fellow officers. It was the full collapse of order. In the East Yard, she saw it unfold like a nightmare. Armed inmates scaled the walls of the guard towers, dragging screaming officers down into the mob. A siren wailed, then sputtered and died, cut off mid-scream. The spotlight beams flickered out one by one, swallowed by fire and smoke. Ramirez ducked behind cover as bullets ripped across the corridor. "We'll never make it through this," he shouted. Jensen's eyes swept the battlefield. She wasn't looking for safety, she was looking for leverage. "We don't need to fight them all," she said. "We just need to hit them where it hurts." She pointed across the yard to the control tower. Its windows were shattered, smoke curling from within, but its reinforced door was still intact. Inside lay the only chance to contain the chaos: controls to the gates, floodlights, alarms. If they could secure it, they could seal the prison and prevent the riot from spilling into the outside world. But the path was hell itself. They sprinted through the corridor, dodging as armed inmates clashed with desperate guards. Twice, Jensen fired her pistol. Once to drop an inmate who lunged with a blade, once to scatter a pair trying to ignite a gasoline trail. Each shot echoed louder than the last, drawing attention. At the base of the tower, they found the door ajar. Jensen shoved it open, pistol raised. Inside, the control room was carnage, bodies sprawled across the floor, consoles smeared with blood. Sparks flickered from severed wires. And standing in the center, illuminated by firelight, was Bennett. His bandage was soaked through, blood staining his uniform, but his grin was feral. In one hand he held a rifle. In the other, the master control lever. "Well," he said, his voice dripping with mockery. The detective finally made it to the heart of the beast. Jensen's gun never wavered. "It ends here, Bennett. The weapons, the trafficking, the murder of crews, it all ends tonight." Bennett laughed, tilting his head back. "Ends? You think this riot is the end? This is just the beginning. Blackridge was never a prison, it was a staging ground. And now the wolves are free." He yanked the lever down. Across the yard, Jensen heard the groan of steel as the outer gates began to open. Panic surged through her veins. If those gates opened fully, nothing would stop the flood. Hundreds of inmates armed with military-grade weapons would pour into the surrounding town. "Don't do it," Ramirez shouted, limping forward. "You'll doom everyone." Bennett sneered. "Everyone's already doomed. Might as well profit on the way out." He raised the rifle. The world slowed. Jensen squeezed the trigger first. The shot cracked like thunder, slamming into Bennett's shoulder. He staggered back, the lever slipping from his grasp, but not before it locked halfway. The gates froze, half open. Bennett roared, firing wildly as Jensen dove behind a console. Bullets shattered glass, sparks showering the room. Ramirez groaned as a round grazed his leg, dropping him to the floor. Jensen crawled forward, heart hammering, until she was face to face with Bennett across the blood-slick floor. His eyes burned with hatred, but his smirk hadn't faded. "You think killing me will change anything?" he spat. "King's still out there. The network's still alive. Cruz was just the first. You'll never shut it down." Jensen fired again. This time the bullet ripped through his chest. Bennett stumbled, dropped the rifle and collapsed against the lever. His breath rattled once, then stilled. Silence pressed heavy over the room, broken only by the roar of the riot outside. Jensen staggered to her feet, blood on her hands, and seized the lever. With a desperate grunt, she hauled it upward. The groan of steel echoed again. This time the gates slammed shut. For now Blackridge was contained. But as she looked out the shattered window, she saw the yard still ablaze with chaos. Inmates clashed, guards fell, smoke and fire swallowed the sky. This was no victory. This was survival, nothing more. She turned to Ramirez, who clutched his leg, pale but alive. "We've got to get this evidence out," she said, pulling the flash drive from her pocket. "Dalton died for it. Cruz died for it. If it stays here, they died for nothing." Ramirez nodded weakly. "Then we fight our way out." Jensen looked down at Bennett's corpse, his smirk frozen in death. She felt no triumph, only the chilling certainty that he'd been right about one thing. The network was bigger than him, bigger than King, bigger than Blackridge itself. And though the gates were shut tonight, the wolves would find another way out. Next, the wolves unleashed. The clang of the prison gates echoed like a dying bell, sealing shut with a finality that seemed to shake the earth. For a moment, silence stretched across the control room, broken only by the ragged sound of Laura Jensen's breathing and the distant crackle of fire. She had killed Bennett. The gates were closed. But the war outside hadn't ended, it had only grown teeth. Through the shattered window of the tower, she watched the east yard writhe like a pit of snakes. Inmates surged across the ground, their bodies outlined in the glow of flames. They weren't just rioting anymore. They were organized, packs of men rallying behind tattooed leaders, armed with the rifles and pistols looted from the hidden cache. One figure stood out among them, Reaper, the giant with ink crawling up his arms and across his throat. He moved with the confidence of a man who knew fear had already switched sides. His booming voice cut through the roar of chaos, rallying prisoners into units. "Take Block B. Hold the yard. No one leaves until we decide." And they obeyed. Jensen's stomach twisted. Reaper wasn't just fueling the riot, he was turning it into a siege. She turned to Ramirez, who leaned against a console, blood soaking his bandaged leg. He was pale but alert, his jaw set with grim determination. "We've got to move," she said. "If Reaper takes full control, Blackridge won't just be chaos, it'll be his kingdom." Ramirez groaned but pushed himself upright. "Then where do we hit first?" Before she could answer, a series of explosions boomed through the prison, shaking the tower. The lights flickered, then died, plunging the control room into near darkness. Smoke drifted in through the shattered window. The rioters were using makeshift bombs, gasoline-filled bottles, rigged firecrackers, anything that could spread fire and fear. Jensen gritted her teeth. "We hit Block B. That's where he'll establish command." They descended from the tower into the chaos. The yard was a battlefield. Guards huddled behind overturned tables, firing desperately at advancing mobs. Inmates dragged bleeding rivals into the shadows, knives flashing in the firelight. Every breath Jensen took tasted of smoke and iron. She and Ramirez kept low, weaving between cover. Twice, inmates spotted them and charged, but Jensen's pistol barked, dropping them before they got close. Each shot made her chest ache. Every bullet was both survival and escalation. When they reached Block B, the scene was worse. The gates were wide open, the cells stripped bare. Fires burned in trash bins, illuminating groups of armed men who stood watch like soldiers. And at the center of it all, Reaper. He stood atop a table, his voice booming over the din. "Brothers, tonight we take back what's ours. No more chains, no more cages, we rule now." The crowd roared in response, rifles raised, fists pounding the air. Jensen crouched behind a shattered bench, her pulse hammering. Reaper wasn't just rallying inmates, he was consolidating power. In a matter of hours, he'd turned Blackridge into a fortress under his command. Ramirez leaned close, whispering, "We can't take him head-on. Not with that many backing him." "No," Jensen agreed. "But if we cut off his lieutenants, we can break the momentum. The wolves only follow a leader as long as he looks untouchable." They slipped into the block, using the smoke as cover. One lieutenant, a wiry man with a scar down his cheek, stood near the stairwell, barking orders. Jensen moved fast, striking him with the butt of her pistol before he could cry out. He crumpled silently, his rifle clattering against the floor. Another lieutenant, tattooed with gang symbols, spotted Ramirez limping and lunged with a knife. Ramirez, slower but desperate, jammed a broken chair leg into the man's stomach, dropping him with a guttural scream. Each takedown chipped at Reaper's aura of control. But he noticed. His gaze swept the block, landing on Jensen as she dragged a downed lieutenant into the shadows. His grin widened. There she is. Reaper bellowed, pointing a massive hand. The badge who thinks she runs our house. Bring her to me alive. The block erupted. Dozens of inmates surged forward, weapons raised. Bullets ricocheted off concrete, shards of glass raining from broken lights. Jensen and Ramirez sprinted up the stairwell, gunfire chasing them. From above, Jensen fired down, clipping one pursuer in the shoulder. Ramirez hurled a fire extinguisher down the stairs, scattering the pack with a burst of smoke and foam. They burst onto the upper tier, ducking into a cell for cover. Jensen's chest heaved, sweat and smoke stinging her eyes. They won't stop, Ramirez gasped. Reapers got them in a frenzy. We'll be torn apart. Jensen's mind raced. Fighting the mob was suicide. But mobs had weaknesses. They needed leaders, symbols, momentum. Cut that and the frenzy could collapse. Her eyes fell on the control panel at the end of the tier, a relic of the prison's old lockdown system. Rusted but intact. If she could reach it, she could slam Block B's gates shut, trapping Reaper and his men inside. It's our only shot, she muttered. They made their move. Sprinting through gunfire, they reached the panel. Jensen ripped the cover off, sparks flying as she jammed the manual override. With a screech of protesting metal, the gates began to slide shut. Reaper roared in fury, shoving inmates aside as he tried to reach the exit. But the gates clanged closed before he could escape, locking him and dozens of his men inside the block. The mob outside pounded against the bars, screaming, but the frenzy fractured. Some turned on each other, others fled. The wolves had been caged again, at least for now. From behind the bars, Reaper's eyes locked on Jensen. His grin had vanished, replaced by a promise of violence. He gripped the bars with hands like vices, his voice carrying through the smoke. This isn't over, detective. You can lock me in here, but the fire's already spreading. Blackridge belongs to us now. Jensen held his gaze, her pistol steady at her side. Not while I'm still breathing. But inside her chest tightened. Reaper was right about one thing. The riot wasn't contained. It was evolving. And if the wolves were already unleashed, then every man in Blackridge, guard or inmate, was prey. Next, Control Room Massacre. Detective Laura Jensen's ears still rang from the screech of Block B's gates slamming shut. For a fleeting second, she thought she'd managed to shift the tide. Caging Reaper and dozens of his wolves was a small victory. But as the smoke swirled around her and Ramirez leaned heavily against the wall, clutching his bleeding leg, she knew it was temporary. The riot outside still raged like wildfire, spreading through every corridor, every tier. And Blackridge's true enemy, the men who had orchestrated this chaos, were still free. We can't hold this forever, Ramirez groaned, his voice tight with pain. They'll break through eventually. Jensen nodded grimly. Then we don't hold it. We move. They limped back toward the administrative wing, each step a gauntlet through fire and blood. The prison stank of gasoline, sweat, and gunpowder. Gunshots rang from every direction. Inmates screamed for vengeance. Guards shouted orders that went unanswered. When they reached the main corridor leading to the central control hub, Jensen's pulse quickened. If she could access the hub, she could override the gates across the prison, cut off power, even flood the corridors with tear gas. It was the last tool left to wrest control from the chaos. But as soon as she pushed open the reinforced door, her stomach sank. The control room was already a graveyard. Bodies slumped over consoles, blood dripping onto flashing lights. Operators lay sprawled on the floor, their throats cut, their eyes staring blankly at the ceiling. The hum of machines mixed with the buzzing of flies. The walls were smeared with handprints, desperate, crimson smears of men who had tried to crawl away before the blade caught them. And standing in the middle of it all was Warden Harold King. His immaculate uniform was flecked with blood, his white shirt collar stained red. In his hand he held a pistol, smoke still curling from the barrel. At his feet lay a fresh corpse, the chief operator, a man Jensen had passed only that morning. King turned slowly, his eyes locking on Jensen. They weren't the eyes of a desperate man. They were calm, calculated, cold. "Well, detective," he said, his voice even. "You've made quite a mess." Jensen's pistol snapped up. "It wasn't me who turned this prison into a slaughterhouse." King stepped over the operator's body, his shoes squelching in blood. "You think you're uncovering corruption. You think Bennett was the cancer. But Bennett was just a tool. This place doesn't survive on order, it survives on fear. And fear, detective, needs chaos to thrive." Jensen's finger tightened on the trigger. Cruz knew. That's why you killed him. He was about to expose everything. King smiled faintly as if amused. Cruz thought he was smarter than the rest. He wasn't. He was expendable just like every other piece on this board. The cartel wanted him silenced. The gangs wanted him silenced. And I wanted him silenced. 3 birds, 1 stone. Efficient, don't you think? Her stomach turned. He wasn't even hiding it anymore. Ramirez, pale and sweating, leaned against the doorframe. You think you'll walk away from this? You think no one will notice when an entire prison goes up in flames? King's eyes flicked to him, then back to Jensen. They'll notice. But they'll see what I want them to see. A riot sparked by animals who couldn't be controlled. A tragic loss of life. And when the smoke clears, I'll be the man who stood firm. The man who tried to hold it together. And the state, hell, the whole country will thank me for it. Jensen's mind reeled. The massacre wasn't a cover-up. It was the plan. The chaos wasn't a failure of the system. It was the system. She scanned the room. The monitors flickered, showing every corner of the prison. Fires blazing in Block C. Inmates storming the infirmary. Guards being dragged down stairwells. And in the lower right screen, Block D, Reaper slamming his fists against the bars, rallying his caged wolves. King followed her gaze. Yes, he said smoothly. Reaper is useful. A blunt instrument. He'll keep the others occupied while I tidy up. By morning, he'll be dead and I'll write the report. Jensen steadied her aim. Not this time. King tilted his head. Are you willing to pull that trigger, detective? Are you willing to kill the only man holding the line between this chaos and the outside world? Because that's what I am. Without me, Blackridge doesn't just burn, it explodes. The words were poison, slick and dangerous. She hesitated just for a moment. And King moved. In a blur, he shoved the nearest console forward, sending sparks flying as wires ripped loose. Jensen fired, the bullet burying into metal inches from his shoulder. King rolled behind a desk, returning fire. The control room erupted in chaos. Gunshots echoing, glass shattering, consoles sparking under the barrage. Jensen dove behind a bank of monitors, the screens flashing with images of death and fire. She returned fire, the crack of her pistol sharp against the roar of King's weapon. Bullets ripped through the room, tearing into dead bodies, sending blood spattering across the walls. Ramirez crawled for cover, his face twisted in pain. Laura, he shouted. We can't outshoot him, we need to cut power. Her eyes darted to the central console. The master circuit breaker loomed behind King's cover, its handle gleaming under the flickering lights. If she could reach it, she could plunge the prison into darkness. Maybe it wouldn't end the riot, but it would buy time. She waited for King's next volley, then sprinted low across the room. Bullets whined past her, one grazing her shoulder, another sparking off the floor. She slammed into the breaker, yanking the handle down. The prison roared as if in pain. Every light died at once, plunging Blackridge into suffocating darkness. The monitors blinked out, the sirens silenced. For the first time all night, the prison was truly blind. Gunfire ceased. The silence was heavier than the dark. Then a voice, smooth and cold, whispered through the black. You think darkness will save you, detective? Blackridge was born in darkness. It's mine. A sudden crack of pain exploded across Jensen's ribs. King had found her, striking with the butt of his pistol. She staggered, crashing into the console. His silhouette loomed, gun raised for the kill. But a shot rang out, not from him. From Ramirez. The bullet tore through King's side, sending him sprawling into the bank of dead monitors. He groaned, clutching his wound, his pistol clattering across the floor. Jensen scrambled forward, her own gun leveled at his head. But King only smiled through the blood trickling from his lips. You can kill me, he rasped. But the network won't die. There are more prisons. More deals. More men in uniforms who already sold their souls. Blackridge is just the beginning. Jensen's hands shook, her finger hovering on the trigger. Killing him would be justice for Cruz, for Dalton, for everybody on this floor. But he was right, he wasn't the whole monster. He was just its face. And outside in the darkness, the wolves were still howling.